Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
If you'd asked me before that night, I'd have said my sister Chloe was incapable of surprising me anymore. After 36 years of side-eyes, spotlight thefts, and well-timed emotional breakdowns at other people's celebrations, I had convinced myself I was immune. But nothing prepared me for the way she hijacked my engagement dinner like it was her one-woman Broadway debut, stepping right into the glow of candles and clinking glasses to drop the kind of line that doesn't just cut you once. It cuts and then lingers like a paper-thin slice right where it hurts most, your pride. There were maybe 30 people there that night, friends, cousins, both our parents looking overly proud and prematurely tipsy, and, of course, Ben, my fiancé, the steady presence I had come to depend on like a fire escape I never thought I'd need. We were seated at this long, farmhouse-style table in a private room at a place called Marigold, one of those rustic modern restaurants where the napkins cost more than my high school prom dress. The vibe was soft and golden, like everything was dipped in honey and good intentions. Until Chloe stood up. She hadn't said much all evening, which I had clocked immediately. When Chloe's quiet, it's never peace, it's patience. She'd been swirling her wine, laughing on a delay, and checking her phone too often, which meant she was either about to drop news or derail something. And, because this was my night, I should have known it would be both. She stood up halfway through dessert, some kind of blood orange tart that no one was really eating, and tapped her fork against the glass like she was about to give a maid of honor speech. Ben looked at me with a slight tilt of concern. I gave him a small smile that said let her do whatever this is, because deep down, I wanted to believe she couldn't ruin what she hadn't built. She started with the voice. You know the one. The sugary, breathy tone she uses when she's acting surprised to be the center of attention. I just want to say, she began, eyes wide, hand on her heart like a drama student, how happy I am for Aaron and Ben. You two are so solid. There was a pause. A carefully curated beat of silence. Then she tilted her head, smiled, and added, and I guess this is as good a time as any to share my news to. My chest tightened. I've just accepted an offer, my dream job, actually. Creative director for a Paris fashion agency. I leave in 3 weeks. The room reacted the way it always did to Chloe's big moments, with applause, oohs, and the clinking of glasses. My mother actually gasped and put a hand on her chest like she was watching a birth announcement. And me? I sat there with a smile that hurt my teeth and the sudden realization that the tablecloth under my fingers felt like sandpaper. But Chloe wasn't finished. She never is. She waited until the room quieted again. She took another sip of wine. And then, like she was flicking a cigarette out the window, she delivered the line that snapped the thread of civility between us. Well, she said, still smiling, I guess one of us is actually going places. Laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from people who don't realize they've just witnessed a knife being slid between ribs. My uncle even slapped the table. My dad chuckled. My mother shook her head like Chloe was such a card. And Ben, God bless him, he stared at his plate like it held answers to moral dilemmas no man should ever have to face. No one looked at me. Not really. Maybe because they didn't know how. Or maybe because they didn't care to. I excused myself shortly after, under the guise of needing to touch up my lipstick, and found myself in the dimly lit bathroom where the mirror didn't lie. I looked at my reflection, not a woman wronged, not a victim, but someone who had just seen the last straw float gently onto the pile of old, dried-out grievances. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at myself and thought, she thinks she's won. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Like a locked door swinging open with a single creak. I pressed both palms against the marble counter, leaned in close to the mirror, and whispered so quietly I barely heard it myself, okay. Game on. I returned to the table 10 minutes later, face fresh, smile intact, and heart pounding, not with hurt, but with the cold, electric spark of resolve. Chloe was still basking in the afterglow of her announcement, fielding questions and fake humbly brushing off compliments. She didn't even notice the difference in me. But something had changed. The air felt tighter. The space between us had become a fuse. The night wound down with hugs and leftovers boxed up, guests stumbling out into the soft dark of the parking lot, unaware they'd just witnessed the first shot in a silent war. Chloe kissed me on the cheek, all sisterly sweetness, and whispered, "You're going to be a beautiful bride." And I said, "And you're going to be unforgettable." Which was true. Just not in the way she thought. There's a certain kind of silence that only settles in after everyone's left your house, but their laughter still echoes in the walls, like perfume clinging to fabric long after the person's gone. I sat in the kitchen with my heels off, a half-full glass of warm white wine in front of me, and the shadows of candles dancing lazily on the wall, the plates still stacked near the sink, untouched since we got back from the restaurant. Ben had gone upstairs already, claiming exhaustion, but I knew him well enough to know it wasn't just physical. He was trying to let me have a moment to myself, which I appreciated, even if I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. The image of Chloe, arms flung wide like she was on the edge of a yacht and not standing in a restaurant in Denver, still burned behind my eyelids, and that goddamn line, "I guess one of us is actually going places," it didn't just sting because it was cruel. It stung because it was crafted, designed to humiliate me in the one moment I had thought was mine. It's funny, people always assume rivalry needs to be loud, explosive, a screaming match in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner or one sister throwing a drink in the other's face at a wedding. But real rivalry, the kind that festers over decades, is quiet. It's the invisible measuring tape you don't realize you've been stretched against your entire life. And Chloe? She was the kind of person who could make you feel like you were standing still just by walking into a room with new shoes. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there next to Ben, listening to his breath rise and fall, and staring at the ceiling, the events of the evening playing over in my mind on an endless loop. And then, like clockwork, came the memories, little moments that I hadn't invited in, but which arrived anyway, unrolling themselves like crime scene footage in the courtroom of my mind. I remembered the birthday party when I was 9 and Chloe, 5 at the time, sang an off-key rendition of some Disney song that had all the adults clapping and laughing while my homemade piñata, the one I had begged our mom to help me make for weeks, sat ignored in the corner, its crepe paper colors wilting. I remembered junior prom, and how I'd finally gotten Jason Myers, the guy I'd had a crush on since sophomore year, to agree to go with me, only to find out weeks later he'd kissed Chloe at some bonfire party the weekend before the dance. Our mother had told me, with a wine glass dangling from her fingers and a sigh, "Honey, you can't blame Chloe for being magnetic." That word, magnetic, has stayed with me all these years, not because it was untrue, but because it was always said with admiration, never caution. There was also the time Chloe got fired from her first real job, something about inappropriate texts to a client, though the details were always vague, and instead of facing any consequences, she cried in our parents' kitchen, mascara smudged, and somehow walked away with a check to get back on her feet and a spontaneous weekend trip to Cabo to help her clear her mind. Meanwhile, when I asked for help covering a car repair during grad school, I got a lecture about financial responsibility and being independent. I took it. I didn't argue. I always took it. I was the mature one. The solid one. The one who made lists and showed up early and never asked for too much. Chloe sparkled. I functioned. But here's the truth I hadn't wanted to admit until that night. Until that moment with her smug little toast echoing in my bones, I wasn't just angry. I was done. Done swallowing it. Done taking the high road. Done being the stagehand in her never-ending performance. And I realized, with a kind of slow-burning clarity, that I didn't want revenge in the way people think of it. I didn't want to yell or scream or ruin her just for sport. I wanted to take back something she had stolen from me 100 times in 100 different ways. The narrative. My narrative. That morning, before the sun had even risen fully, I made myself a strong cup of coffee, ignored the mess in the kitchen, and opened my laptop. There was no plan yet, not a full one, but my hands moved with certainty I hadn't felt in years. I clicked through the usual wedding planning tabs, then over to Canva, of all things, where I began designing a save-the-date that would stop people in their tracks. It wouldn't say wedding. It wouldn't say engagement. It wouldn't say anything other than a single phrase, a bold font on a minimalist background, along with a date and time. I picked a neutral color gray, just the right kind of corporate and mysterious, and typed out the words. Save the date, for the real celebration. I added the time, the location. No details. No images. No frills. I sent it out to every single person who had been at that dinner, plus a few extra, extended family, a couple of Chloe's friends I still had on Facebook, and this part was both strategic and a little petty, our parents. It was subtle, not the act of a woman lashing out in grief or rage, but the move of someone who had decided. About 30 minutes later, as I was standing by the sink washing out my coffee mug, my phone buzzed. Then again. The messages started pouring in. Is this part of the wedding plans? What is this event? Why did I just get a random invite from you at 7 in the morning? And then came the call. Her call. Chloe never calls early. She doesn't even exist before 10 a.m. unless there's a flight or a fire, so when her name lit up my phone screen at 7:42, I already knew she was rattled. I answered with a casual morning. She didn't even say hello. What the hell is this thing you just sent out? Her voice was low, shaking, but not from emotion, from control. That voice you use when you think you're still holding the steering wheel, but feel the car sliding out from under you. I paused for effect, maybe 2 seconds too long, then said lightly, oh that? Just something I've been planning. You'll want to be there. Aaron, what the hell is going on? What are you doing? She was trying to sound annoyed, but I could hear the tightness in her throat, like she was already running mental checklists, wondering what I knew, what I had seen, what was coming. And then I gave her the exact line she had earned, each word chosen like a needle sliding into silk. You won't want to miss your own curtain call. I hung up before she could answer. Then I sat back down at my laptop, opened a folder I hadn't looked at in months, a collection of screenshots and email threads Chloe had once accidentally sent to the wrong Gmail account, mine. Inside that folder, sitting like an unexploded bomb, were the beginnings of something she had probably forgotten or assumed I'd deleted. But I hadn't. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about what you say. It's about what you already know. The thing about executing a plan like the one I was about to set in motion is that it doesn't begin with fury or even heartbreak, it begins with control, a cold, calculated calm that settles into your chest like an anchor, heavy but grounding. That morning, as the sunlight started to bleed through the kitchen blinds and the hum of my refrigerator filled the quiet space left by Chloe's shaken phone call, I realized that for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I was the one holding the script. And she was scrambling to find her lines. The thrill of that alone, I won't lie to you, was almost intoxicating. I didn't respond to her texts, which came in short bursts, questions first, then exclamation-pointed demands, followed by a few half-hearted attempts at acting confused, as though she were the victim in a misunderstanding rather than the architect of a public humiliation. But I knew my sister's strategies too well by now to mistake them for sincerity. When Chloe doesn't know what's happening, she tries to control the story by pretending she's already heard it, which is why her last message, just before noon, read, "If this is about the dinner, you're seriously overreacting." It was a joke, Aaron. People laughed. As if laughter, even the nervous kind that fills a room like smoke after a spark, is a measure of whether something is cruel or not. But I didn't respond. Not to her. Not to anyone. Instead, I spent that day finishing what I had started, not just the event invitation, but the architecture around it. There's an elegance, I think, in letting your enemy build their own trap without knowing it, and Chloe, in her desperation to always appear more successful than she really is, had already given me all the rope I needed. I just had to decide how and when to pull it. That folder, the one I had opened the night before, marked simply Paris Files, wasn't the result of some malicious stalking or secret hacking. It was, ironically, the outcome of her own arrogance. A year prior, she had applied for a position at a fashion agency in Paris, a real one, with a high-profile client list and a reputation for being cutthroat in both style and business. She had used my email address by mistake when filling out a contact form, a slip she never corrected, and over the next several weeks I began receiving fragments of that application process, the auto-responses, the rejection letter, and most damningly, the back and forth between Chloe and a friend of hers named Maddie, in which they exchanged plans to fabricate an offer letter in order to boost Chloe's profile on social media. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was pathetic, yes, but so typically Chloe that I had filed it away under "not my problem" and moved on. Until now. Now, that digital paper trail, screenshots of emails, metadata on PDFs, timestamps of edits on Google Docs, had become my ammunition. And I was no longer interested in being the bigger person, not after being made to smile through champagne toasts while my family applauded a lie wrapped in glitter. 3 days after the dinner, with the guest list thoroughly confirmed and the venue secured, a sleek event space downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a subtle air of corporate minimalism, I followed up the mysterious save the date with a second email, this time with a subject line that simply read, "Details to follow, a night to remember." Again, no clarification. Just enough intrigue to keep them on the hook. The speculation spread like a virus through our extended circle. My Aunt Sharon called me twice, leaving voicemails filled with poorly disguised curiosity masked as concern. "Erin, honey, just wondering if everything's all right. We're all so excited for the wedding, but this other thing, is it bridal related?" Even Ben asked, gently but firmly, whether he should be worried. "I'm not blowing anything up," I told him, which was technically true. "I just think some truths deserve a stage." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. I think he knew something was brewing beneath the surface, but Ben, God bless him, has always been more comfortable with avoidance than confrontation, and as long as I wasn't setting the literal wedding on fire, he was content to let me manage the emotional bookkeeping of my life however I saw fit. The night before the event, I sat alone in the living room, my laptop open to the final version of the presentation I had prepared. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't vindictive. It was factual. A slideshow simple, clean, methodical, that would walk the audience through the illusion Chloe had constructed and the quiet paper trail she had left behind. The fake email account. The doctored offer letter. The lie told with such precision and confidence that it had not only fooled everyone, but somehow elevated her, once again, above me on a pedestal she hadn't earned. But what mattered most, more than the documents or the digital footprints, was the context I would give them. The years of manipulation, the calculated sabotages cloaked in just teasing, and the way her charm had always been her shield. I wasn't going to destroy her reputation. I was going to remove the mask. The morning of the event, I woke up early, calmer than I'd expected, and dressed deliberately, black slacks, soft cream blouse, no jewelry, minimal makeup. Not because I wanted to look severe, but because I wanted to be unreadable. I arrived early at the venue, tested the projector, and stood by the refreshment table as guests began to trickle in, their eyes flitting between one another, trying to decode the tension that hung in the air like static before a storm. Chloe arrived 10 minutes late. Of course she did. She walked in wearing white, a tight, off-shoulder cocktail dress like this was her engagement party, and offered the room that familiar wide smile, the kind that said, "I'm the reason you're here, you just don't know it yet." But when she saw me standing near the front of the room, and then noticed the screen behind me already glowing with the title slide, "The Truth About Going Places," her smile faltered. Just slightly. But enough. I didn't greet her. I didn't have to. The lights dimmed. The room fell quiet. And I stepped forward. I took a deep breath, clicked the remote in my hand, and watched the first slide appear behind me. "Tonight," I said, my voice even, "isn't about a wedding. It's not about Paris. It's about perception, and what happens when we let a lie grow so big, it starts to feel like the truth." Then I clicked again. And just like that, Chloe's story began to unravel, not with rage or spectacle, but with facts, receipts, and silence. There's a precise moment, barely noticeable unless you know exactly what to look for, when the balance of power in a room shifts, when the glimmer of certainty behind someone's eyes dims just slightly, and you can feel, almost physically, the weight of their facade beginning to tremble beneath its own design. For Chloe, that moment arrived exactly 8 minutes into my presentation, during slide 7, when I displayed the metadata from her fake job offer letter, highlighting the timestamp that proved it had been created not by an international firm based in Paris, but in Denver, from a Gmail account registered under her middle name spelled backwards. I saw it in her posture first, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched tighter around the stem of her wine glass, and the twitch of her cheek as she forced herself not to blink too often, pretending to absorb the information like everyone else instead of watching the walls she had so carefully painted start to peel. The room, once buzzing with low murmurs of confusion and polite curiosity, had descended into a dense, almost reverent silence, not the kind reserved for grief or tragedy, but something far more intimate and unsettling. The collective realization that they were not witnessing a scandal, but a slow, deliberate undressing of a narrative, layer by manufactured layer, and that they had all, in some way, participated in the performance by applauding the lead actress for a role she never earned. My voice, steady and clear, felt like it belonged to someone else as I walked the audience through the steps of Chloe's deception, how she had begun circulating rumors of the Paris job weeks before the engagement dinner, planting seeds of curiosity with vague social media posts and carefully angled conversations, how she had forwarded the fake offer letter to herself from an alias account to create the illusion of legitimacy, and how she had even gone so far as to update her LinkedIn profile to reflect a role she never held, with endorsements from colleagues who, upon closer inspection, didn't seem to exist anywhere outside of digitally generated profile pictures. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sneer or gloat. I simply presented the truth, clean, undeniable, and quietly devastating. People started shifting in their seats, not with boredom, but with discomfort, the kind that creeps in when the mask slips from someone you thought you knew, and you realize how willing you were to believe their myth simply because it was easier than questioning your own gullibility. My father, seated near the front, looked like he had been punched in the stomach, not because of the deceit itself, I think, but because he was finally seeing, with brutal clarity, just how long he had confused charisma for integrity. My mother, on the other hand, sat stone-faced, her lips drawn in a thin line, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if bracing herself against the cold gust of reality she had tried so hard, for so long, to pretend wasn't there. And Chloe? She didn't speak. Not once. Not a single objection or gasp of denial. She just sat there, eyes locked on me, her expression teetering between fury and fear, as though she were waiting for me to stop, to blink, to flinch, anything that might give her an opening to retake control of the room she had walked into expecting to dominate. But I didn't. I kept going. The final slide was simple. A white screen with 2 lines of text, going places isn't about geography. It's about honesty. And beneath it, a quote I had once heard our grandmother say when Chloe and I were still too young to understand what it meant. The truth has a quiet voice, but it never forgets its lines. I closed the laptop, looked out across the room filled with stunned silence, and said, without venom or triumph, so I guess one of us is actually going places. And one of us is just very good at pretending. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for a reaction. I simply stepped back, left the screen glowing behind me like a pale ghost, and walked toward the refreshment table where the untouched flutes of champagne still stood like props on a set whose performance had ended too early. That was when I heard it, the scrape of a chair against the polished floor, hurried footsteps, and then the sharp clatter of a glass being set down a little too hard. Chloe was leaving, her heels tapping a chaotic rhythm against the marble as she brushed past the stunned faces of our relatives and friends, not bothering to explain or excuse herself. She didn't look at me as she passed, but I caught the tight set of her jaw, the glint of unshed tears she refused to let fall, and for a brief second, one agonizing, flickering heartbeat, I wondered if I had gone too far. But the thought passed. What lingered instead was the memory of her toast, not just the words, but the way she had said them, with that smug, polished cruelty that came so naturally to her. as if cutting me down in public was some sort of family tradition she had inherited and refined. And for once, I hadn't smiled and swallowed it down. I had answered. Not with anger. Not with insults. But with truth. After the room slowly began to buzz again, guests whispering to one another in hushed, astonished tones, Ben came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything right away. He just reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and grounding, and I could feel the question in his silence even before he asked it. Are you okay? I considered lying, saying yes or something deflective like I had to do it. But the truth, the real truth, the one I hadn't yet spoken aloud, even to myself, was messier, harder to contain in clean lines and calculated slides. I wasn't okay. I was hollowed out, like a bell that had been rung too hard and too often, still vibrating from the impact. And yet, beneath the emptiness, there was a clarity I hadn't known I needed. She never once said sorry, I finally said, watching the door Chloe had disappeared through swing closed behind her. Not for this. Not for anything before it. And if I'd let her get away with it again, I'd never be able to look myself in the mirror. Ben nodded, not because he agreed, necessarily, but because he understood. And sometimes, that's the best you can hope for, not agreement, not validation, but understanding. We stayed for another hour, accepting the awkward small talk of guests who didn't know what to say, their congratulations and condolences offered in equal, confused measure. Then we left, the echo of my presentation following us out into the cool night air like a whisper that had finally been spoken aloud after years of silence. As I lay in bed that night, staring once again at the ceiling, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt still. And maybe that, after all this time, was enough. In the quiet that settled after the storm I had unleashed, I found myself drifting through the days like someone walking through the aftermath of a party they didn't want to throw, where the decorations are still hanging, but the music's long since stopped and the guests have all gone home with whispers on their lips and questions tucked into their coat pockets. At first, I thought I'd feel some kind of release, that long-awaited sense of liberation that people talk about when they finally confront the person who's spent years cutting them with smiles and walking away untouched, but instead, what filled the space left behind was a strange mixture of silence and consequence, like the breath that follows a slammed door. I had struck a blow, yes, and I had done it with precision, with restraint, with facts instead of venom, but the aftermath didn't come wrapped in the triumphant ribbon I thought I'd find waiting on the other side. It came quietly, with phone calls that went unanswered, and long, drawn-out pauses in conversation that hadn't been there before. Chloe didn't respond, not that night, not the next day, not even after our mother called me, furious and trembling with disbelief, her voice brittle and high-pitched like the crack in a plate that's just about to split. "I can't believe you would do that to your sister," she said, no preamble, no curiosity, just raw, sputtering anger that wasn't about what had happened, but about the fact that I had made everyone see it. "You humiliated her in front of our family." In front of everyone, she hissed, as if Chloe hadn't been doing variations of the same thing to me for decades, only softer, subtler, more socially acceptable. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I knew better. My mother had spent her entire life shielding Chloe from consequences, and no slideshow, no spreadsheet, no carefully presented timeline of deceit would ever rearrange the architecture of her belief that my sister was to be loved, forgiven, and excused no matter what. But it wasn't just her. Over the next week, the ripple effect of what I had done started to take shape in little ways, in the distant tone of my cousin when she texted me about the wedding, in the way Ben's parents exchanged glances when I mentioned Chloe's name, in the awkward stutter of my father's voice when he called and started the conversation with, "Your mother's still very upset," as though that was my burden to soothe, not his to address. And Ben, to his credit, never once told me I shouldn't have done it, never questioned my right to the truth, but even he had that look in his eyes sometimes, the kind that asked, quietly and without accusation, whether the price of winning had maybe cost too much. I started to wonder that myself. Because the truth is, you can build a case, You can gather your receipts and draw your timelines and expose every shiny falsehood for what it is, but there's no victory in being right when the cost is isolation. No one throws you a parade for being the one who points out the emperor has no clothes. They look at you like you're the one who made everyone uncomfortable, and in a way, you are. You became the mirror no one asked to look into. And yet, despite the discomfort, despite the fractured relationships and the lingering frost in the air when my name was brought up, I didn't regret it. Not entirely. Because for once in my life, I hadn't let her rewrite the ending. I had stopped the performance, pulled the curtain myself, and let the audience see the wires and pulleys she had always hidden behind charm and confidence, and just enough vulnerability to make people feel guilty for questioning her. And that was something I needed to do, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for myself, so that I could finally stop rehearsing all the things I should have said at every birthday, graduation, and Sunday dinner where she made herself the center of attention at my expense. Still, the silence stretched on. Until one afternoon, nearly 2 months after the night that had upended everything, I opened the mailbox to find a single envelope, thick, white, no return address, postmarked from France. My breath caught before I even opened it. Inside was a postcard. On the front, a black and white photo of the Eiffel Tower, cliché and impersonal, like something bought last minute at an airport gift shop. On the back, a single sentence in her handwriting, elegant and confident as always. Turns out shame can be a good motivator. Going places now. You were right. Thanks for the push. And beneath it, just one initial, C. I stared at that line for a long time, my thumb resting against the edge of the card. My heart caught somewhere between fury and something that almost felt like pride, though I hated myself for even entertaining the idea. Was she really in Paris now? Was the job real this time? Had she somehow stumbled into legitimacy by using the wreckage of her own lies as fuel? Or was this just another performance, another curtain call staged from across an ocean, where I couldn't verify the facts or call her bluff? I'll never know, and maybe that's the part I'm meant to sit with, that some truths don't come with closure, only echoes. I didn't show the postcard to Ben. I didn't call my parents to mention it. I didn't text her back, though part of me, the part that still remembered us building pillow forts as kids, or sharing headphones on long car rides before everything got so complicated, wanted to. Instead, I stood at the kitchen sink, held the postcard over the flame of the gas burner, and watched as the edges curled and blackened, the ink warping into ash before falling gently into the basin. Because the truth was, I didn't need her to admit she'd been wrong. I didn't need an apology wrapped in sarcasm, or an acknowledgement laced with one more manipulative hook. What I needed, what I had always needed, was to know that I could finally live a life that wasn't defined by what she did or didn't do. And burning that postcard, as symbolic and dramatic as it might seem, was the first real step toward cutting the cord that had tied our identities together for too long. People always say that family is forever. That blood is thicker than water. But what they never tell you is that blood can also stain, and sometimes, the only way to wash it off is to stop pretending it binds you in ways it never truly did. So yes, Chloe may have finally gone somewhere. She may have crossed an ocean, changed her address, updated her resume with a new title that, for once, might actually be real. But the truth, the one no postcard can erase, is that the only person who ever stood still all those years, clapping politely while she bowed for applause, was me. And now, finally, I'm walking away. Not in pursuit of revenge. Not in pursuit of validation. Just in pursuit of a life where I no longer have to share the stage.